This is Paul Steimer today on the 135th edition of the Sports Untold podcast, also on the Seattle-based Rainier Avenue Radio.world. My special guest today is Seattle Times sports reporter and columnist Larry Stone. I'm going to get back to you in a minute, Larry. My podcast is now on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, Google, iTunes, Podbean. You go to sportsuntoldpodcast.net. I encourage people to click the like button. My new producer is Olivia Coyne. Been friends with Olivia's family for a long time. She's doing a great job, UW student. Larry, I'm going to get back to you. Larry Stone's been a longtime reporter for the Seattle Times, beginning, I think, in about 1996. Larry is a graduate of Cal Berkeley. He was a former beat reporter for Seattle Mariners. I think in about 2013, he became a full-time sports columnist, I believe, with the Times.
I did, yeah. I was never actually the beat reporter for the Mariners, although I did a lot of Mariner coverage. But my title was National Baseball Writer, and I filled in on the Mariners quite a bit, but never actually was the Mariner beat writer.
Gotcha. Thanks for clarification. Larry recently announced his retirement at the Seattle Times, which has gotten a lot of publicity, and I'm excited to get Larry on as he's still an active working journalist and columnist at the Seattle Times. Larry, thank you for coming on the Sports Untold podcast, also on Rainier Avenue Radio.
My pleasure.
Great. Well, fun. We wanted to get you on for a while. I'm glad we're finally doing it. I'm really glad, as I said a minute ago, to get you on before you officially retire. Larry, you've had a long career in sports journalism. Why don't you tell us how you got the bug? And why don't you also tell us what you think you would have done career-wise if you did not become a sports journalist?
Well, I've often thought about that. I have no skills I can't fix anything. I'm not very technical. I probably would have become a teacher, I think. But I went to Cal and, I played sports in high school. I had no real intention of becoming a sports writer. And my freshman year, I picked up the school paper, the Daily Californian, and there was a little ad that said, we need sports writers needed. So I thought, well, that sounds like fun. So I went into the office, and it just so happened that the guy who covered Cal baseball had come down with mono that week, and they were desperate to have somebody to cover Cal baseball. So sort of sight unseen, they sent me out to do a story on Cal baseball, and they liked it, and they assigned me that for the rest of the year. And then I was hooked. I had the bug, as you said, and became a staff writer my sophomore year, sports editor my junior and senior year, and went from there.
Kind of sounds a little bit like a guy named Lou Gehrig who stepped in one day and Wally Pipp couldn't play, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened to the guy I replaced. I don't think he came back to the staff.
Okay, we heard that term getting pipped, so.
Sure.
Larry, you mentioned you're a Cal Berkeley graduate, and we hear a lot in the Northwest, all the thoughts on what UW and Washington State are doing with the whole conference shuffling. Give us sort of your thoughts on Berkeley headed to the ACC.
Yeah, I don't really like it. I don't think many Cal people that I know like it. I think it's better than the alternative, which was to sort of be, I think there was even some fear that they would de-emphasize sports completely and leave Division I. I think them and Stanford, that was one of the things that was bandied about. But this whole splintering of conferences and heading to geographically illogical places, I don't like it. I understand it. I understand what the motivation is, but it just doesn't seem right to be, we're a Pacific Coast school. To be headed to the Atlantic Coast Conference is illogical. And my prediction is that in about 10 years, everyone will realize that, and all these conferences will be reunited by geography. But for now, we'll have to live with it.
Larry, I had Keith Gilbertson on my show a couple of years before the pandemic. And Keith, as you know, is a University of Washington football coach. He coached at Cal.
Sure.
And Larry, Keith said to me in so many words that coaching at Cal was just a whole different deal. He described it as being a pretty tough situation. Is that a bad way of describing the Cal football program?
Well, I've actually talked to Keith about that myself, and yeah, he didn't have a great experience. I think he felt that it wasn't, the football wasn't emphasized enough. Yeah, I mean, I think they have football in perspective. They have sports in perspective, and if that's your livelihood, you may not like that, but overall, I think it's probably a better, healthier attitude than win at all costs and that sort of thing. And there's a lot to navigate there. It's there's a lot of constituencies at Cal, and so they've hit hard times now athletically. I think they need to once again sort of have a reckoning about, do they want to compete or do they not want to compete? And that's probably an open question that doesn't have an easy answer. So I'm, as a Cal grad, I think you have to be content with occasional, maybe once every 10 years, you have a great year. I mean, Gilby had one great year while he was there, and sort of have fun with that when it happens.
Can't forget Marshawn Lynch was there for
sure.
Yeah. You know, Larry, I was just reading John Wilner's column. He's a Pac-12 reporter for the listeners, and his columns frequently appear in the Seattle Times. I think he's based in San Jose, but in any event, and he had a column about the UW president's explanation on what happened at Pac-12 negotiations. President Anne-Marie Casse, am I pronouncing her last name correctly? Casse. President Casse claims that they never formally made, or she suggested the universities never formally made a $50 million counteroffer per school to ESPN. What's your general take on the UW president's explanation about what happened?
Well, you know, I haven't read that column yet. I was wrapped up in the Mariners, and it was sort of consuming, and it's one I have on my list to get back to. I apologize for that. I just know that the ending of this thing is sort of shrouded in mystery, and there's a lot of accusations back and forth about who's responsible. You know, Washington State's not happy. In Oregon State, they sort of, I think, blame Washington and Oregon for reneging on, an understanding that they were going to give this a go. So, I'm going to have to get back to you on that one, because I'm not sure what she said at the moment.
Fair enough. It was a little, as I read the column, it was a little kind of unclear what exactly she was saying. But anyway, I just want to get your perspective, and at some point it'd be interesting to hear it. Larry, we're going to talk baseball and the Mariners today. I'm sure that's a big shock for you, but we're definitely going to hit on it. You're a longtime baseball reporter. So I read an article, a friend of mine actually pointed this out to me last night in the Mariners game, that in early 23, Forbes magazine states the Mariners lead all 30 Major League Baseball franchises. It's pretty amazing. Operating income and year-over-year value growth, two interesting categories. Is this a sign the Mariners just need to step up and spend more on players?
Well, I think a lot of fans certainly make that case. You know, it's a complicated question. You look at the two teams that spent the most this past season were the Mets and the Padres. And they both have had disastrous seasons. You know, they have payrolls 300 million or approaching that, and neither of them have winning records or have been contenders all year. So it's not just a matter of spending; it's a matter of spending wisely. But I think it's fair to say that the Mariners need to step up more this year. They still, as we talk right now, they still have some life with 3 days left in the season, so they're in contention. But it hasn't been the jumping off point from last season when they broke their playoff drought. And I think the fact that they weren't very aggressive in the offseason may have something to do with that, or does have something to do with that. And I think, Shohei Ohtani is going to be on the market. He'll be the most coveted free agent in a long time. He's not going to pitch this year because he has an arm injury, but his bat is tremendous. I think the Mariners need to go all in on Shohei Ohtani, and a signing like that, which would be tremendously expensive, I think would sort of stifle for a while the talk that the Mariners aren't willing to spend to compete. But that's the perception that people have, and in some ways it's accurate.
So you kind of see it as a fair perception. At the same time, you mentioned that spending doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win, though, either. So you have a nuanced view of it, kind of. Yeah.
You just a lot of the free agents that the people wanted, that fans wanted the Mariners to go after, have been busts. 2 years ago, Chris Bryant, Trevor Story, neither one of them have done much. But on the other hand, you need talent to win, and you got to pay for talent. And in Seattle, you have to overpay for talent, probably because where we're located, the travel, the ballpark. If you're a slugger, you don't want to come to play in the Marine layer here and watch your stats probably go down. So and a good example is Marcus Semien, who's a star with the Rangers, who the Rangers signed him to, I think, a 7-year deal that the Mariners weren't willing to go to 7 years, but he would have been a perfect player for Seattle. At some point you got to make a deal like that, and maybe it'll be bad at the end of the contract, but in the short term, it's a kind of player you need to bring.
Larry, let me ask something. So, of the pro Seattle sports franchises, we'll include the late Sonics in this question. Tell me if I'm off base. It seems to me the Mariners have more trouble attracting other free agents. I don't remember this. I don't really remember the Seahawks or the Sonics. I guess the Kraken now attracting free agents, or the Sounders, that matter. Is this more of a Mariners issue than a?
Well, the Mariners. You look back, they signed Robinson Cano, who was the number one free agent on the market that year, because they paid him a tremendous amount of money. They got Robbie Ray. So they have attracted over the years. Richie Sexson got a huge contract. Adrian Beltre got a huge contract. So, when they're willing to pay that kind of money, they attract free agents. But I think it's just tough, because baseball is unique in the fact that there's far more travel than there is in the other sports. So I think that's a factor. And I think that attracting offensive talent is hard, because I think players think that it's not a hitter friendly ballpark. And if you have a choice between Seattle and Texas, where the weather's nice and you can rake, and build up stats, a lot of times you're going to pick Texas. So that's why I said the Mariners probably have to overpay in a lot of cases, which is what they did with Cano.
Oh, good points. Laura, I want to talk about it today, a little journey on your career and some interesting moments you've had in your career. What was the toughest column you think you ever wrote? Maybe it was because you were critical of someone you liked, or there was just some awkwardness writing the column. What do you think is the toughest column you've ever written?
Let's see. Well, when the the Seahawks drafted, now his name escapes me. He went to Kansas. Frank
Clark.
Frank Clark, yeah, and he had some domestic violence incidents, and they drafted him, and I thought they shouldn't have drafted him because what was hanging over him, and I wrote a pretty harsh column that day about that. But in this job, you have to do that every once in a while. Earlier this year, I wrote that this was that it seemed like this was the most hated Mariners team by fans that I'd ever seen, because they were underachieving. At the time I wrote it, they were under 500, coming off the playoff year, and people were mad at the team, and the Mariners, I don't think they liked that column very much. So it's when you have to sort of jab them a little bit. I tried to be fair and build up trust, and people know that I'm not a cheap shot artist, I think, and I'm not a hitman. So when I am critical, I think maybe it's accepted a little bit more, because I don't play that card every day. There's some columnists who just fire him, and I'm not that guy.
I read your Mariners column earlier this year, Larry, and I got to tell you, I think you were onto something, but it kind of hit me like, gosh, this team's driving me crazy.
Yeah. And then, of course, what happened, they turned around and had their best month ever right after I wrote that. Right. So, that always happens. It seems like whenever you write something, then something happens to counter that. But
now they're back with a bad September, so it kind of evens out.
Right. Yeah. I was.
Laura, you've been working in the sports media field for so many decades. What's the toughest interview you ever did?
Toughest interview. Well, I covered Barry Bonds with the Giants. I was the beat writer for 6 years, and he was tough on a daily basis. Just to what was tough about him was you never knew what you were going to get, because he could be charming and approachable one day, and then surly and mean-spirited the next. So that you almost prefer somebody just to say, "Hey, I'm not talking," or what you're going to get. But when you don't know, that could be a real challenge. And I can't think of any that are like notably combative interviews that I've had. Most players, they understand the game, and they know how to play it, and they know that's part of the gig, and you might not always get an engaged person, but it's rarely hostile.
What was the most fulfilling column you ever wrote?
Ooh, you know, I've written a lot of columns about people who are battling illnesses, or I did one on Dave Grosby, the Graz, who is he's got a condition that he's MS, that he's fighting, and that was a very fulfilling column. It got a lot of great response, and I like it when I could do a column that's somebody that's maybe not a superstar athlete, but has a human story, and those are the kinds that I like to do.
I've had Dave Grossman on a show, great guy, and your colleague Steve Kelly gave a similar answer. He's enjoyed writing columns about kind of non-sports people or less known people that have had impacts on people.
Right? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Can I interrupt? I said MS. He has Parkinson's.
Parkinson's, right.
Yeah, Parkinson's.
When Dave was on in December 2019, we talked about his diagnosis, and
yeah,
we want. I like to bring up some healthcare awareness subjects on my pod. Larry, I've asked these two questions about every guest since I don't know, around late 2019. Who's a living sports figure you would really enjoy chatting with or interviewing, and who's a deceased sports figure in history you would have enjoyed interviewing or chatting with?
Yeah, well, living, that's pretty easy for me. My idol, my sports hero, was Sandy Koufax, Dodger pitcher in the 60s. I grew up in LA in the 60s. And he still sort of has a larger than life aura about him, and he doesn't do many interviews, so I don't think I'll ever get to do that, but I'd love to talk to Sandy, who's getting up there in years. I think he's about 88 now. Looks like he's about 68. He's in tremendous shape, but he's the one that I would pick living. And Jackie Robinson, I think, deceased. I've read a lot of books about his journey and his struggle, but I'd love to talk to him about it in person.
Those two aforementioned are very high on my list of a living and deceased sports figure I'd love to chat with. Let me mention about Sandy Koufax. I'm going to throw a plug for a podcast. I've been listening to a very fascinating podcast this week called Jews, Sports in America. And there's been a lot about Koufax on it. It's very interesting. It's very about assimilation, and it's a great podcast. I think her name is Meredith Scheller, who is at CNN and has been involved in some networks as the host.
Yeah, I'll check it out. And also, there's a book by Jane Levy that came out about 5 years ago, a biography of Sandy. He didn't participate, but he cooperated, and it's called Lefty's Legacy, I think. It's Koufax, and tremendous insight into Sandy and great untold stories about his career and his life.
I've read the book, and I had Jane on my show a couple of years ago. She's terrific.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, great.
She's terrific. Yeah, love to have her back. Larry, you have been in a sports journalism for so long. Who's a living sports journalist you'd love to chat with or interview, and who's a deceased figure in sports journalism you'd love to spend time with?
Well, I'll start with the latter. Jim Murray was a legendary columnist at the LA Times, which was my paper growing up. But I think he transcended the LA Times. I think most sports writers of at least of my age revere Jim Murray and consider him to be the best there ever was. And he pretty much popularized a style of writing that still exists to this day, with kind of wisecracks and one-liners and things like that. No one had really done that before him. So I think he'd probably be the deceased one. Living, Joe Posnanski is a great writer. I'm friendly with him, so I do have access to him. I could do that, and I will at some point, but I think he's about as good as there is right now. Tremendous stylist, and is amazingly prolific, but I think Joe would be the guy.
I am very slowly reading Joe's book on the baseball top 100, about halfway done with it. It's a great book.
Yeah, yeah, I've got that too.
Great book. All right, one more. Who's a living figure in the business side of sports you love to spend time with, and who's a deceased figure in the business side of sports you would love to have interviewed or spent time with?
Well, maybe Walter OMalley, the former Dodger owner who moved the team from Brooklyn to Los Angeles, just to get the inside story of how that happened on the business side. And current, maybe the owner of the Oakland A's. You know, I lived in Oakland for 10 years when I lived in when I worked in San Francisco for the Examiner, and they're uprooting that team and moving him, which I think is shameful. And I think this guy hasn't done an interview in the entire time he's owned the team. So I'd love to grill him a little bit on why this is happening and why they've allowed this team, which is really an important part of the fabric of Oakland, to just shamefully disintegrate into an embarrassment to baseball right now.
Real shame. Real quickly, favorite sports movie and favorite sports book?
Sports book would be Ball Four by Jim Bouton, kind of a seminal book in my life. As it came out, I think I was 12 years old or 13 years old, and it just opened my eyes to a whole nother side of baseball, that your heroes are not quite as heroic as you think they are. And what was the other one? Movie?
Yeah, favorite sports movie.
Sports movie. League of Their Own, I think. That's one I keep coming back to and watching a lot. Just the humor and the pathos and the acting and the writing, it all is really brilliant, I think.
I read Ball Four, and it's been described as the Catcher of Rye of baseball books.
Yeah, exactly.
So all right. You are an Edgar Martinez biographer, and you have written a lot about Edgar, and I think we can call you an Edgar Martinez expert witness. If there was an expert witness at Edgar Martinez, you would be one of them. I hear he's obviously a great player. Seems like a very affable guy. What are some things that you find interesting about Edgar that maybe the average fan doesn't know about this Hall of Fame player?
Well, his life itself was very interesting as I delved into the book. Yeah, he grew up in this town called Dorado in Puerto Rico, and his parents split up, and they wanted him to move to New York and with his grandparents, and he flat out refused. He was like a young kid, 8 or 9 years old, and he went up on the roof when it was time to leave, and they couldn't find him. And he basically stayed with his grandparents in Dorado rather than go to New York. And just that sort of single-mindedness sort of permeated through his whole career. When he didn't sign until late, he was 20 years old when he signed. Most prospects from Latin countries and other countries, if they sign when they're 16 or 17, and then he hit like 170 in Bellingham in his first year and thought he was going to get released. He just persevered. And one of the great privileges of my entire career was when he went into the Hall of Fame, he allowed me to be in the hotel suite. The family went to New York because it was his daughter's birthday, and they wanted to take her to a Broadway play, and it just happened to be the day that they announced the Hall of Fame. And there was also going to be, if he made it, there was going to be a press conference in New York. So it made sense for them. So anyway, I flew to New York, and I was in his hotel suite, and it was just me, his wife, his kids, a Mariner employee, and a close family friend and his brother, and waited out the phone call to see if it would come. And when I was there when he got the call that he had made the Hall of Fame, and in typical Edgar fashion, you'd think he'd be shrieking and dancing around, but he when he took that phone call, it was almost like he had called room service to ask where his hamburger was, because he was so so matter of fact about it. But the family did there was a lot of shrieking from the family, but it was just to be there at that incredibly important moment in his life was something I'll never forget in my life. And
Well, that access you had to Edgar is just incredible.
yeah, and then I went to his induction ceremony as well in Cooperstown, and that was a great thrill.
And thanks for sharing a little more about him. I didn't know that he got signed at 20 years old. I didn't know. I know he didn't really start till he's about 27 as a major league player, right?
Yeah, he was stuck behind Jim Presley and Darnell Coles. He was tear it up in AAA at Calgary, but never got his chance until late when there were some injuries, and he just took off.
I want to go back to the base. Well, actually, I'm going to go more in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and I got kind of a tougher question, two questions for the Baseball Hall of Fame, and I want to get your perspective. So, I had on a couple years ago the famous attorney Alan Dershowitz, and I had him on because he was involved in the Curt Flood case, and he's actually written about sports law, and he's been involved in some sports law cases. Controversial, interesting guy. And Dershowitz has two thoughts here. I want to get your take on them. He feels very strongly that Curt Schilling is getting wrongfully blackballed by the Baseball Writers Association, not getting the Hall of Fame. Dershowitz says he does not agree with Schilling's politics, but he feels that Schilling's getting wrongfully blackballed. Second thing Dershowitz says, he feels that they should abolish the character criteria for the Baseball Hall of Fame. He feels that it's just resulting in all sorts of subjective criteria getting in the way of good players not getting in. What do you think of Dershowitz's 2 points? One on Schilling not getting in, and two on his thoughts that the character requirement should be thrown out.
Well, I voted for Schilling. I don't like his politics either, but I voted for him every year he was on the ballot. He's not a slam dunk Hall of Famer. I think there could be cases made for and against him beyond what you think of him personally. But I do think it probably cost him some votes for sure. But at the end, I think he would have made it. He almost certainly would have made it his last year, but he asked writers in the next to the last year when he came close. He said, I'm not interested. I don't want to be voted in. Don't vote for me, basically. And so he didn't make it. And he's going to go to the Veterans Committee, and we'll see what happens there. He still has another route to the Hall of Fame. The character issue is the character clause, I guess. It's a dicey one with the steroids. It doesn't matter, character clause or not. What is complicating the Hall of Fame vote is steroids and guys like Barry Bonds and Alex Rodriguez who have Hall of Fame stats and are not getting voted in. And I think whether you have a character clause, voters are still going to decide whether they feel like people who they believe juiced up should be in the Hall of Fame. So I think that's still going to come down to a personal decision. And, it's a tough thing. I voted for Barry Bonds because I felt that there were a lot of players who used steroids that we didn't know about. There was no rule at the time banning players specifically from using steroids, which is why I don't vote for Alex Rodriguez, because they codified that with a drug policy in 2004, and he violated that twice after that. So I think there's a distinction, and I'm not the only one who makes that distinction, between Bonds and Clemens pre that, when that happened, and like Manny Ramirez and Alex Rodriguez, who violated it after it became the law of the land, so to speak. So any voting, people say that baseball writers shouldn't vote, but any voting body that you have is going to have the same dilemma. And when Barry Bonds was on the Veterans Committee ballot this year, he voted not by the writers, but by other players and baseball executives. He got a lower percentage than he did from us, the BBWAA. So it's just a sticky situation that I don't think any voting rules are going to solve. It becomes down to what you believe as far as PEDs and whether players accused or perceived of using them should be in the Hall of Fame.
Now, if a lot of these players' transgressions are playing a role in why they're not getting in, you mentioned a whole bunch of them. And I recognize too, I don't agree with Schilling's politics either. He said a lot of over the top stuff. But if these guys are being kept out, should a guy like Ty Cobb be kept in?
Yeah, that's always the example that is used. I mean, I don't think you start kicking people out of the Hall of Fame. You have the gatekeepers who decide who goes in, and I mean, I don't know how you could litigate Ty Cobb's 100 years after the fact, but it's a great privilege to be a Hall of Fame voter, but it's also it could be a major headache because you have to grapple with these kind of questions every year.
The distinctions you're making on the steroids is interesting. How you as a writer have evaluated it, that looking at some of the Rodriguez's situation, say, versus Bonds, and those are interesting distinctions. All right, I'm going to mention a bunch of players who are not in the Hall of Fame. We have the controversial ones like Pete Rose and Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, A-Rod. Feel free to comment on those. But what's your take on some other good players who are not in, like Steve Garvey, Keith Hernandez, the late Dick Allen,
Yeah.
Bob Mattingly, Don Mattingly? Just comment on some of those who are not in the Hall of Fame, whether you think they should be in.
Yeah, some of those were almost were before I was eligible to vote, so I never really had a vote on them. I mean, there's a tremendous number of players who fall in that gray area where you could go either way. Hank Aaron, Ken Griffey Jr., Willie Mays, those are easy votes. Even though they weren't unanimous, they were close and they should have been unanimous. But it's the ones like Steve Garvey and Dick Allen who give you toss and turn over, because you can have arguments for and arguments against. I would have voted if I never had a chance to vote for Dick Allen, but I've studied his resume, and I think he's a Hall of Famer. That's why they have the Veterans Committee as well. It's when you're on the ballot, the BBWA ballot, you're on for 10 years. It used to be 15 years, but they lowered it to 10 years. And if you're not voted in after 10 years, then you have a second avenue to get in, which is the Veterans Committee, which is a group of, I think, 16. So instead of having a 500 member body vote on you, it's a much smaller group. And I think you need 75% of that. So you have a second avenue, and a lot of players have gotten in through that means. And those guys you mentioned, they've had many chances again to get in beyond the baseball writers and still haven't gotten in. So I think that shows that they are borderline candidates. And a lot of them, like Mattingly, he had a tremendous peak, but it was a brief peak. So and same with Dale Murphy, another guy that I think I'd like to see Dale Murphy get in, 2-time MVP, but his peak was short, and that's what's, I think, has kept him out of the Hall of Fame. So, and the other thing is that there's a lot of new ways of evaluating players that were not there when guys like Garvey and Allen played. It was batting average, home runs, and RBIs. Now with sabermetrics analytics, we have the capability of looking far deeper into a player. That helped Edgar. His stats on the surface weren't that great, but when you dug into him, and on base percentage is much more important now than it used to be, and his was over 400, which is elite. So things like that. Sometimes you take a new, fresh look at a guy, and he's better than you think he is, and that helped Burt Blyleven get into the Hall of Fame. It took him, I think, 14 of the 15 years before he got in. So sometimes that's why that's why you're on the ballot for a long time, so that people could take your career can be evaluated in different ways at different times.
And Edgar got in on the last time he was on the ballot, right? The 10th time.
10th and final time. Yep.
Yeah, amazing. Well, you got time for a few more questions, Larry?
Sure.
Good. Larry, I'm kind of a Hall of Fame junkie. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame interests me too. I like Hall of Fame talk, and you're a Hall. It's fun to have a Hall of Fame voter on my show. Um, Jack Sikma was inducted in the Basketball Hall of Fame a couple years ago, and tell me, Larry, if you agree with this. Would you agree that the Seattle sports media and the media in general could have given Jack Sikma's Hall of Fame induction a little more attention, like compared to Edgar's? Jack Sikma got like maybe 1% of the attention Edgar got when he got the Basketball Hall of Fame. What did the media underreport Jack Sikma's accomplishment of getting into the Basketball Hall of Fame?
I don't remember. Maybe the fact that I don't remember how the coverage was might say something. I don't know. I think there's a aura to the Baseball Hall of Fame that maybe the NBA, the Basketball Hall of Fame doesn't have, just because it's been around longer. I think it resonates more. But perhaps it was underplayed. I don't really have a strong feeling on that. I think it got a lot of play at the time. If Marchand when goes in, I think he'll get a tremendous amount of publicity for that. So I think Jack Sikma in general is a player who was underappreciated in his career, but I guess he wasn't too underappreciated since he's in the Hall of Fame.
Maybe if we had an NBA team in Seattle, the story would have got more attention too. So
yeah.
There's that. By the way, speaking of Marchand and Russell Wilson, do you think they'll be Hall of Famers one day in Canton?
I think Marchand will. If you'd asked me that 2 years, I would have thought that Russell was a slam dunk, no questions asked. There's an interesting school of thought now that he may be playing his way out of the Hall of Fame with his second act of his career in Denver, which has been nothing short of a disaster for him. He had a terrible year. His first year, the team tanked. They changed coaches, brought in Sean Payton, who was supposed to resurrect Russell, but they're winless. It seems to not be meshing with Payton. There's a lot of speculation that he may not even last the season as the starting quarterback. So I still think he'll make the Hall of Fame, but I don't think it's the certainty that it was. If his career kind of fizzles out and he doesn't have a turnaround, I think it may be a little more dicey for him than we ever thought.
Right, another Basketball Hall of Fame question. Robert Horry has 7 rings. He was called Mr. June, but wasn't a great regular season player. Does Robert Horry have a Basketball Hall of Fame case?
I can't say that I'm as well versed on the NBA. The whole time I've been the columnist here, we haven't had a team, so I haven't covered it much. But there are, you get rings. How responsible is he for those rings? Was he on the right team at the right time? There's a few players with Michael Jordan who got rings who really didn't contribute that much. I'm not sure if he's a Hall of Famer or not. I can't say that I've studied Robert Horry's stats or career that closely to really put down an opinion on that.
Fair enough. I asked Lenny Wilkins that question. He said Horry should be on the Hall of Fame. I asked Eldridge Kazner. He said no. And I said to Eldridge, well, I guess Robert could have a best supporting actor argument. And Eldridge goes, well, he definitely wasn't the lead actor, So.
Yeah. That's kind of my thinking too.
Yeah.
What I know of his career.
Soto Arena, is it dead or on life support?
Probably close to dead. Yeah. I mean, you have the beautiful arena now at the Seattle Center, and I think they're going to get basketball soon. I'm not sure what the need for a Soto Arena would be at that point.
Is Geno the Seahawks quarterback for most of the rest of the 2020s?
We're only in 2023. I don't think so. Maybe to the mid 2020s. He's already in his 30s.
Fair enough.
I think he's got 3 or 4 years probably in that role, but I don't think he'll make it through the entire 2020s.
Will the NBA be back in Seattle by the end of the decade?
Yes, I think it will. I think it's heading in that direction. It looks like once they get that Vegas arena done, they're going to expand, and all signs point to Seattle being the other team coming in. They have everything they need, the history, and now they've got the arena. They have the ownership, or at least it seems like they have the capacity to have the ownership. The Lewicki's are tremendously well connected in the NBA circles. I think it's going to happen.
Larry, you've certainly written about basketball, football, and baseball. Do you enjoy covering sports like soccer and hockey and some other sports?
I do, yeah. I had never really done it much until I became the columnist, but I really enjoyed covering soccer. I covered the Sounders in two MLS Cups in Toronto. One they won and one they lost. Really got into that. Really enjoyed the Stanley Cup playoff run last year. Traveled to Dallas and to Denver. So yeah, over the years I've covered just about everything, horse racing and boxing, and I don't think there's a sport that at some point in 44 years that I've done this that I haven't covered. But the more regular basis of covering the Sounders and the Kraken was a blast. Yeah.
What a great career you've had. So many sports fans are envious of your career. You gonna miss it? Gonna miss traveling with the teams and all that?
Absolutely, yeah. I want the Mariners to make the playoffs, not as very selfishly, because I want one more run of covering postseason baseball, which is what I love the most. I did that for years and years and years before newspapers kind of started ramping down on covering things like that didn't involve your teams. But for a lot of years, I'd cover the World Series and the LCS, whether my team was in it or not. And I love covering postseason baseball, just the excitement. So, and last year when the Mariners finally made it after 20 years of not making the playoffs, and I went to Toronto and then Houston with our group, Ryan Divish and Adam Jude, just had a tremendous time covering that, and I was looking forward to doing that one final time before I retire in November. So we'll see what happens. They're one game out as we speak, so they have to make up a game in the next 3 days. And I don't know if I'm going to Toronto, Tampa Bay or Minneapolis or nowhere.
Gosh, I want to make the playoffs so bad. Well, Larry, this may be my last question or two. What does the future hold for Larry Stone after you retire from the Seattle Times? Are you going to be going to games as a casual fan now?
I'm sure I will. I don't think I'll be able to stay away. You mentioned that you interviewed Steve Kelly, who I actually replaced as the Seattle Times columnist, right. Great friend of mine. Right. But he's at everything. He's at Storm games. He's at Sounder games, he's at Seahawks games, Mariner games, Husky games. He's a junkie. He's a sports junkie and can't stay away. I don't know if I'll be there as often as he has been in his retirement, but I will, if nothing else, than to see the guys, the guys and ladies that have become my friends in sports writing. And but I don't have any grand plans right now, just to kind of relax and figure things out. I'd love to do a book project, another book. I figured if I wrote the Edgar book while I had a full-time 40-hour-a-week or more job, I figured without a job, writing a book might be a little easier if I didn't have an actual full-time job to worry about as well. So I think I'll do a book project at some point, but
love it.
At the beginning, I'm just going to relax and let the stress kind of evaporate from me.
Well, by the way, I took Steve Kelly to a Husky game last year, so I'm an eyewitness. He has gone to a Husky football game. So
I've seen him in many press boxes, many times at a Husky press box, so I can vouch for that too.
Well, Larry, what a great career you've had. It's just so much fun to get you on, and like I told you a couple of times this interview started, I want to get you on before you retired and have some reflections about your career. And thank you so much for coming on the Sports Untold podcast.
My pleasure, Paul. Thank you for having me.
You too, Larry. You take care. All the best to you.
Thanks, Paul.
You too.